everyone. I'm Gail Ecker, Director of Equine Guelph at the University of Guelph, and with me today is Julia Merritt. Julia has been a board member for Ontario Equestrian since 2017 and has a Master's of Information Science and has been assessing the data submitted by the For the Herd applicants so that it can be used for advocacy and planning purposes. She's also CEO of the Stratford Public Library, where she's been managing in a disrupted industry since 2013. Thank you for coming, and welcome, Julia.
Thank you for having me, Gail.
So we're all very aware of the impact of COVID-19 on barns today, and specifically the ones that depend on giving lessons for their business. Your area of expertise in data assessment has allowed you to take a look at the information and come up with some pretty important observations that will be of value to our lesson barn sector. So let's talk about that. And what have you learned about areas of vulnerability? What are the important points there?
Well, there are 5 main points that have come out of the assessment of the applicant pool. We have now just over 100 applicants. So we have a pretty diverse set of circumstances, but there were some very specific themes that recurred again and again, which we can extrapolate to the broader sector in Ontario and flag those as areas that barn operators and lesson facility operators will want to have a look at and see if those categories apply to them, and maybe if they want to do something about them to insulate themselves from further disruption. So one of the main pieces that kept coming up over and over again is that high rents for those who rent are a major complicating factor. There are people who are operating in areas where the cost of living is high and the rental fees associated with their facility are commensurately so, and they are finding that when the state of emergency was declared and there was a shutdown of their operations, that this rent proved to be a very significant challenge for them. The second component was the ratio of schoolies compared to the number of boarders. Those applicants who had a minimum of 50% boarders on the property filling the stalls seemed to be less financially strained than those who had more than 50% of the horses on the property as lesson horses or other non-working animals. So that is a significant item around which many facilities could plan going forward in terms of the proportion of income that is coming in to their business. The third piece was the diversified income streams. So having a combination of school-let horses, of boarded horses, and sale horses really seemed to help because people were noting that in the case where finances became tight, they would sell a sales horse, and then that would reduce their overhead and provide some cash income. So that was an opportunity for people to mitigate their own risk by having multiple streams of income. Those operations where they are entirely lesson horse based were absolutely suffering the greatest the effects of the restrictions placed on us in the state of emergency. Other sort of diversification of activities that seemed to really help people, of course, are the very basic ones, situations where grass pasture was available and or the ability to make hay on site by oneself, by that same business. Having to buy hay, not having grass pasture to alleviate some of the pressure to have hay available year round were definitely factors that were contributing to the financial stress of people. The fourth category that we did see from time to time was that additional non-working horses on the property really increases the pressure on the overhead. So these would be retirees, they would be young stock, personal horses, brood mares. All of those animals really add up. And it seems like not so many when everything is running at full capacity, but as soon as that income was reduced by 50, 75, 100%, all of a sudden those non-working horses, they're not generating any income or they're not saleable, become a significant liability. And then the last factor that was less for some, but given that some of the information was offered voluntarily, we don't know if it is a factor for more than was indicated in our sample size, is the price point for boarders. Does the amount that an operation is charging for boarding actually cover the costs fully of that individual horse, of that privately owned horse? Some applicants were reporting that they had their boarding service as a loss leader, providing them with the opportunity to make back the loss and then make a profit as well by having that service. But not having the boarded animal pay for its full cost puts them in a much more vulnerable position as soon as those COVID-19 restrictions were put in place. So those were the 5 categories: owning a property versus renting, and the high rents associated with being in different cost of living areas, the ratio of schoolies versus boarders, having diversified income streams, having non-working, non-income generating horses on the property, and then the actual price point for the boarding service as one of those diversified income streams, whether that price point actually covered the cost of providing the service.
So those are really important points for anyone to keep in mind, diversification and all, really making sure that your costs are covered by the pricing. So let's stick to our theme of surviving then thriving. So we know now some areas where people have to take a good hard look at what they're doing, but let's look at some of the forecasting that we need to do. So what are the things that you've looked at in terms of forecasting?
We looked for forecasting, we're looking at the amount of money it's actually going to take in order to provide the necessities of life for the school horses. And then going forward, how do those costs intersect with what's actually happening in the wider world and in the economy? So for us, we took a look first at what the average cost would be to provide feed, grain, and bedding for the average farm's school horse string. So what came out of the data that we had was that it costs an average per month of about $2,500 to pay for hay, feed, and bedding for a farm's schoolies. Of course, that is a range, of course. It depends on the number of school horses that people have. It depends on where they live. It depends also, again, on whether they have hay that they can make on site versus hay that they are purchasing, and the cost of that hay depending on the cost of living associated with the area that they're based in, all of those things. But we can tell you that the average cost per month to pay for the necessities of life for one farm's school horses is about $2,500. That does not include vet and farrier, so you would have to inflate that, of course, and prorate that amount monthly in order to get the true monthly cost. But that is the starting point at which we are operating in terms of understanding what it costs to keep these functions of the business going. And then we looked at what people were forecasting. We asked our applicants to describe what they anticipated their income was going to be through the summer based on operating within the restrictions of phase 2 of Ontario's reopening plan. Now, we know today, July 13th, that the province is due to make an announcement about moving to phase 3. So that may or may not impact riding facilities. But in phase 2, where riding facilities are allowed to have lessons, but they are restricted as to the number of people in any one given area of the property at any one time, and the number of students in the lesson, obviously, and therefore that impacts camp and so forth. Under those restrictions, 90% of our applicants were forecasting that they would only be able to generate up to 50% of their normal lesson income. And for many, it was much less than 50%. 50% is a nice round number. There were many, many applicants who were forecasting the ability only to make 25% of their income. And in some cases, they were anticipating 0 to 5% of their income. Many riding schools have models that only address beginner riders, where you would want to have a sidewalker, or you would need to have much closer physical contact than was permitted under those restrictions, and that consequently they did not believe that they could generate very much, if any, income. So right now we're looking at almost the entirety of the lesson facilities being able to only generate 50% or less of their normal income, which, given what we know generally about the very thin, small profit margins of horse farms, and the expectation that this economic disruption is going to last for several years, this is strongly indicating that riding facilities should be making business plans based on that level of income in the future. And there are a number of risk factors that make this type of scenario planning quite prudent. First is that the current projection for vaccine availability is early 2021. However, the success of the vaccine strategy is going to depend on whether the vaccine has a sufficient uptake to create herd immunity that will make the previous iteration of operations safe to resume. And it will also depend on whether the vaccine is effective against the multiple strains of the virus that we know exist, and whether that is going to be effective against any mutations of the virus that are almost bound to happen and to be transmitted country to country, province to province. Second is that there is the possibility of a second wave of infections in Canada in the fall and winter of 2020-2021, which could result in the rolling back of the freedoms or the permissions that we have currently, and there would be increased restrictions again that would prevent income from being generated or as much. And then third, there's also the distinct reality that globally infections have not peaked, and that this global situation may become much worse and consequently impact Canada. As of today, the United States has more deaths than Canada has recorded cases. And we know that at an additional, right now, 60,000 new cases being diagnosed in the United States every day, that their curve has definitely not flattened. And that is going to have significant impact on us economically going forward. And we also know that global infections have not peaked in India. They have not peaked in Africa. They have slowed in Europe and some other places like New Zealand. However, that situation may change based on travel and or the availability of vaccine in those areas as well. So we must be mindful of the fact that the global situation may become significantly worse, and that may impact us as well.
So certainly confidence of the clients is going to be a big factor regardless of what is open or what isn't.
Yes, absolutely. Confidence that they will still have the funds to continue engaging in this activity, confidence that all of the safety protocols are being managed. General confidence is going to be key in ensuring that existing clients stay on and that new business can be generated.
Now, I know OE has been working very strongly in the background, trying to help the facilities and help the horse industry, along with Equestrian Canada. And we've heard some discussion about an OE facilities program. So is there anything that you can sort of talk about with OE talking to their facilities? What are in those discussions for the future?
Yes. With the timing that seems to be typical for this particular year, Ontario Equestrian was working in the late winter, February, March, to redesign its existing facilities program. So facilities who wished to be members or were members of the OE facilities program were invited to focus groups, and OE spoke with them about what they needed in order to see business success for their operations. And those facilities responded very strongly that what they needed help with was for OE to assist with providing real-time business analysis and marketing functions, and helping those two things progress through various tools that might be available to all of them. So OE took that input back and away, and then the pandemic was declared. So not much progress has been made on that since, simply due to the fact that OE had to pivot to working towards advocating for riding facilities to be able to be open and what the parameters around operations were. However, now OE is working on coming back to that program and going to be working for the rest of this year to ensure that there is a system through which facilities can come together, can have access to information that helps them, to have access to a group, a collaboratively created effort that will then help those businesses move forward, be more resilient, be able to create better connections with potential and existing clients, and make those business functions better for themselves. So OE is really excited about the facilities program. The feedback that they received from the focus groups was really, really positive, and really, really concrete actions that they can take to help the sector be more resilient going forward. And that's exactly what we need as we continue to go through this pandemic, because we know that this is not over now by a long shot. This is going to be at least the next year, if not the next two, and then the economic repercussions are going to be they're going to be with us for quite some time. So everything that we can do, everything that OE can do to help this sector move forward and to be strong is something that they want to do.
Well, and certainly OE has stepped up strong. They need to be acknowledged for that challenging task to do what they can to help. So in summary, I just want to thank you, Julia, and the Ontario Equestrian Board, and to Jen Sweet. So any last words for our listeners?
Just to encourage everyone to continue to participate in this wonderful forum that Equine Guelph has put together, and there are courses through Equine Guelph that will be wonderfully helpful for addressing some of these business challenges going forward. And also that if you would like to participate in the incubator group with OE in developing the facilities program, or you just want to have more information, please do reach out to Ontario Equestrian directly, and they'd be happy to connect with you.
My thanks to you and OE for all that they're doing, and thank you so much for the interview today.
Thank you, Gail. My pleasure.